Good day and welcome everyone to I4CP's Next Practices Weekly. We have two fabulous guests for you today who we will introduce in just a few minutes as we discuss Huber's people-first approach to workplace inclusion and belonging. See if I can advance these. All right. If you're new to Next Practices Weekly, we are I4CP, the Institute for Corporate Productivity. We're your human capital research partner, and we discover the practices that drive high performance. We do this in a variety of ways. First and foremost, through our major research studies, of which we do 5 to 6 a year. We look at organizations that are high performers and compare their results on various HR practices to low performance organizations. This is determined by our Market Performance Index, which is based on revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction over a 5-year period. Let me see. We are also a member-based community. So beyond our research studies, we provide a lot of peer interactions, including calls like Next Practices Weekly, flash calls on hot topics, webinars, and various practitioner-specific board and exchange groups. Our members range from very large, well-known companies to a cohort of smaller startups, ranging across various industries, sectors, and geographic regions. If you're with one of our member companies, we'd like to give a special welcome to you and thank you for joining us today. If you're not with a member company but would like to know more about what that entails, just reach out to anyone at I4CP or go to i4cp.com for more information. My name is Eric Davis, and I am the Senior Editor and Creative Director at I4CP. I also have the pleasure of co-hosting our DE&I Next Practice weekly calls. I'm joined this week by my colleague and co-host Amber Burton, one of I4CP's Senior Research Analysts. Good morning, Amber.
Good morning, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Amber will be leading the chat with our guest today, but first, just a few more announcements on upcoming events. This is Next Practices Weekly, and most weeks we gather here on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. Next week, on May 1st, we will be joined by Joanne Lublin, leadership speaker and Wall Street Journal career columnist, and author of the book Power Moms: How Executive Mothers Navigate Work and Life. Then on May 8th, we will be talking with Alejandra Ferraro, Global Center of Expertise Lead of HR at Accenture. And on May 15th, we will be featuring an interview with Brian Elliott, CEO at Work Forward. One last thing before I turn this over to Amber. I4CP has recently published the brief DE&I in 2025, How Organizations Are Making DE&I Decisions. This is a member-only brief that is available to all I4CP members and details how organizations are navigating the Trump administration's executive orders related to DE&I, as well as other anti-DEI political and media pressures. The study looks at the impact of the EOs are having on culture, well-being, and productivity, the role of data in DE&I decision-making, and what practices are being continued, discontinued, or put on hold. We also break down how groups like federal contractors and high-performance organizations are responding differently. You can access the report by scanning the QR code on your screen, clicking on the link in chat, or directly from the I4CP website. So with that, let me turn it over to Amber to introduce our guest for today.
Thank you, Eric. I am so excited to introduce our two guests who are joining us today. Today, we're joined by Alyssa Masters, who's the VP of Human Resources and Ethics Officer at Huber Engineered Woods. And we're also joined today by Matt Minchew, Culture and Inclusion Program Leader at Huber Engineered Woods as well. Thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Amber.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into this conversation, I always like to remind people this truly is a conversation. So we want everyone to feel welcome to drop their questions, comments in the chat. As we go throughout this conversation, both Eric and I will keep an eye out. We'll make sure that those questions get answered. We'll pause. We'll make sure that this is a back and forth dialogue because we have a lot of great topics to cover today. So with that said, we're going to jump right into it. I always like to start these conversations just by asking my guests, about their dynamic HR careers. You both have had, it's almost an understatement to say you've had dynamic careers in HR. So can you both just briefly introduce yourselves in your own words and just tell us a little bit about your career journeys? Matt, we can start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Amber. So I've been in my role for about 2.5 years, and I've learned that my path to HR is perhaps not that unusual to other HR folks. I'm about 22 years into my career, and I've had kind of a circuitous road that's led me here. I started off in communications at the Environmental Protection Agency, and then actually totally switched gears and got into a sales role with an industrial company. And so at this stage, my career is basically split. I was in different sales roles and sales leadership for about 10 years. And then I switched into marketing, got into product management, marketing communications, and eventually became general manager of one of our product lines here at Huber. And did that in total in marketing also about 10 years before switching gears and getting involved in HR about 2.5 years ago.
Wow. Elise, what about you? Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I've actually May 1st, I will be with Huber for 25 years, which is, I'm dating myself, but it's hard to believe. Currently the Vice President of Human Resources, and I'm the Ethics Officer. I joined the company in 2000, and I had several different roles. I was the Manager of Organizational Development. I was also the Director of HR, and then in 2006 became the Vice President of Human Resources. Before joining Huber, I was a professor at Central Connecticut State University, and I worked at various training and development roles. I also worked at US Healthcare and United Technologies. And then lastly, I have a bachelor's degree in marketing, which I believe has helped me throughout my HR career, and I have a master's degree in organizational management.
Both of you have a little bit of a marketing background in there, and it's so funny because I think it's become more and more important in the more recent years. So I'd love for us to touch on that at some point as well. But tell everyone a little bit about how, in your current roles, how you work together and kind of interact and support each other.
Yeah, so Matt and I have been working together for just 2 years, but really, it's really all around engagement, DE&I, and all of our inclusion initiatives. So that's what we do together on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And then for those who aren't as familiar with Huber, can you tell us a little bit just more about Huber as an organization? Maybe take us into a little bit of the culture of Huber. Just bring us on in. Tell us everything about just the feel of the company.
Sure. Well, I can start. Huber is a privately held, family-owned company, and it was actually founded in 1883. It's one of the largest family-owned businesses in the United States, and we produce innovative building products for residential, multifamily, and light commercial products throughout the nation, really. I'd characterize our culture, we call it our crown jewel. So it's really, really important to us. It's the foundation of everything that we do at Huber. It drives our performance, it inspires innovation, and most importantly, it makes sure that people are really connected to not only each other, but to their jobs. We really value and aspire learning and development. It's one of our most important competencies that we have here. We've also, we've implemented a lot of, Matt in particular, I can't take all the credit for it, but Matt has implemented a lot of programs to really connect people throughout the organization. So for instance, we have these get to know lunches where senior leaders on a monthly basis take our employees out and just get to know them and find out more, not only about what they do every day, find out about their families, things that they like to do outside of work. At the end of the day, a lot of the activities that we do are really to just connect our employees throughout our 1,000 person organization.
Oh, absolutely. I can already hear just your values kind of coming through and how you're describing the culture. Are there any other parts of your values that you're like, I see this show up every single day in action?
Yeah, the company's values, I would say, are like our operating system of our culture. So they really shape everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. So, overall, I would say they define our expectations, they influence our hiring and our promotion process, They guide all of our decisions, particularly in times of uncertainty, and they really shape the employee experience at Huber. I think they also show up in our everyday moments. So it's how we conduct our meetings, it's how feedback is given to each other, and it's how our wins and failures are handled on a day-to-day basis. So for us, the values are not just a poster on the wall. It's really the DNA of our organization.
Well, we're going to get more into what that looks like in action. Matt, I'm going to throw it over to you. I'd love for you to just kick us off by just telling us a little bit about Huber's very specific approach to workplace inclusion and belonging. How has this approach sort of played out within the organization historically?
Sure. So I would say there's a couple of core ideas that guide our focus. One is that in terms of the employee experience, we want people to feel that they are treated with dignity and respect on a consistent basis in their everyday. We want employees to feel that they have a deeper sense of belonging with the teams here. And then another is that we're fortunate in the sense that we have very low turnover in our business. People tend to stay and develop long-term careers with our company. And so with that in mind, we realize that what every employee needs in order to develop a successful career here is going to vary from one individual to the next. And so when it comes to our talent acquisition process and learning and development, we really try to tailor it down to the individual level so that people can do great in their current roles, but also develop a long-term successful career here.
Absolutely. And I think there's something especially unique. I mean, you kind of hit it on it earlier when you were just talking about Huber. This is a family-owned company in its sixth generation of ownership. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. So how has your approach developed through just multiple generations? Elise, can you maybe speak to that evolution?
Sure. The notion that personal values should play a part in how we operate our business and treat employees has really existed from the beginning of time. And I'll give you an example. So in 1920, we had a plant in Louisiana. And at that time, it was really common for employers to provide housing to employees to really help them to facilitate move into these, rural areas with no housing options, throughout the country. Also, at that time, Louisiana was segregated. So that meant that Black and white employees were not allowed equal pay or were not allowed housing. So what was not common at that time was how our company approached the situation. We insisted on providing equal pay and identical housing for all employees, regardless of race. So this goes all the way back to 1920. So way before any of our inclusion or DE&I initiatives. If you fast forward that today, those principles still remain within our organization. So this thinking really guides how we, invest and partner with schools, with healthcare providers and others, so that we can thrive within the communities that we operate and that we can support, the larger communities in which we operate in.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that history. I saw you getting a little bit of love in the reactions down there. I mean, that's incredibly unique, and it just speaks to how long it's been rooted in the foundation of your company. And thinking back to that is very important. That being said, we can't talk about inclusion without talking about the various segments of your workforce, the unique fabric of your workforce. So, Elise, can you just talk a little bit about the various segments of Huber's workforce and how you kind of approach the different segments in leading with inclusion and belonging?
Sure. So we have 5 manufacturing facilities throughout the company, and we're actually very excited. We're building a new plant in Sugar Lock, Mississippi, as we speak, which should be up and running after the first quarter of next year. But each of our plants has approximately 150 employees. Our corporate office is in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that's where Matt and I work out of. We have about 90 people in this office. So this includes all of our core functions. So HR, marketing, IT, finance, et cetera. And then we actually have 80 salespeople throughout throughout the United States that are running around and selling our products. We also have a timber group located in Bangor, Maine. And what they do is they specialize in sustainable forest management. And they offer services such as timber management, harvesting, and then procurement.
And so with that, I mean, that is such a diverse array of jobs and locations, geographies. And I mean, we've done a lot of work through our advisory arm with different organizations and making sure that you are appealing to different segments of your organization with the benefits, the programs that they need. So how have you kind of managed listening and understanding what various portions of your organization need and want in terms of support?
Matt, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, from an inclusion and belonging standpoint, a few things come to my mind. What I mentioned that I'd been in this role for a little over 2 years, and something I noticed pretty quickly was that even the terminology DE&I evoked strong opinions out of people who actually had no experience with the actual work yet. And so one thing to contend with was just the perception and the emotion around DE&I. And then the second had to do with, in essence, any initiative that is starting at a headquarters and then flowing throughout the organization. I think there were natural questions around how is this going to help me do my job better tomorrow? And so, for instance, we mentioned we have 1,000 employees, most of whom are hourly employees working shifts in our manufacturing sites. And so this might be somebody who operates a crane or works on the production line saying, how will this training or this learning help me do that better tomorrow? And so for me, I view these as elephants in the room. And so from the beginning, really address them heads on. And so as it related to DE&I, be very specific and saying, look, here are some things you might be hearing. This is what it is. This is what it's not. And just grounding people in that foundation from the get-go. And then secondly, to your point around, understanding different segments, something I've seen in our workforce, may be true in many companies, is that there's always some sensitivity around people from headquarters or people in managerial roles being in an ivory tower, so to speak. And so I think for us, what's been important is to literally go to where the work is being done. So when we're engaging with our hourly workforce, we are at the plants, meeting with them between shifts on their schedule. And so sometimes that means 5:30 in the morning, 6:30 at night, but literally doing it on their turf, on their time. And then also we've learned that there's enough difference in different departments, different locations that we've really partnered with local teams to localize some of the content and the programming that we offer.
Oh, you hit on a lot of things that we're thinking about here too. I mean, Eric can speak to this. He and my colleague Lori Likens have done an awesome amount of research, and we've deployed a pulse survey just about the state of DE&I. And a lot of the findings and a lot of the research and articles that we're reading kind of share out exactly what you're saying right now is even saying out diversity, equity, and inclusion rather than saying DE&I kind of reduces some of the stigma around it and some of the tension and makes it a bit less divisive. So that language has become more and more important. Have you all found that you've had to define more terms or educate more in some areas that you didn't before?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's been interesting for us. We typically, we could be a data-driven culture in our business. And so we actually survey every single learning session that we provide on DE&I. And something that's been interesting is number one, and they're paper surveys done anonymously because some people are nervous about submitting things electronically. So what's been interesting is that number one, our employees actually complete the surveys. We wondered if people would just duck out of the meeting afterwards. People do the surveys. And what's been interesting is that there's this very wide divide between people's general thoughts around DE&I broadly versus what their reaction is to the specific programming that they've been involved in. And so the learning I guess I've had is that when we're speaking ambiguously in the abstract about a program, I think that can work against us. And so we really try to drive the communication around the actual programs and experiences that our employees are engaged in, because the feedback on our programming has been excellent.
Well, let's get into some of that programming. I mean, you're making my job easy here. That's exactly where I was going. I'd love for you to tell everyone a little bit about what those programs look like as it relates to workplace inclusion and belonging. Yeah, Matt, can you maybe kick us off? And then Alyssa, I'd love for you to tell us some about your ERGs.
Sure.
Happy to. So from a strategy standpoint, the three areas we focus on are talent, culture, and community. In terms of the programming, I'd like to share some things about culture and community, as well as how we've localized that work. So when we think about culture, one aspect in the spirit of inclusion has been, how do we increase education and experience around matters of background and identity to get to this place of deeper understanding of each other. And what's been interesting is to find that people are actually very interested in learning about cultures other than their own and gaining experiences with cultures other than their own. I think the caveat for us, at least, has been as long as it's delivered in a way where they don't feel intimidated by their lack of prior knowledge or lack of prior experience. And so, for instance, that's where we've really worked with our local teams to say, what types of content or subject matters are relevant for your site and interesting to your employees. So, for instance, we have a manufacturing site in Virginia, and this is in a town where very common that people have spent their whole lives in the town, and in some cases have never even traveled outside of the county. And so people really know each other in this place. And so for Black History Month, they had in the break room pictures of various people from the community that everybody knew. But what people did not know was the significance of these individuals as it related to the Black community and the history of the Black community in that town. So literally, this was people going like, I've known that person for 20 years. I never knew that they were the first Black police officer in our town, or the first Black, firefighter, the first Black person to serve in the state legislature in Virginia. And so people really responded well to that experience, and it was defined and driven by our team right there in Virginia.
That is an awesome example of just localizing these programs. And we've found, I mean, time and time again, that is what makes these programs stick, and that's what makes them more effective. Elise, maybe you can speak to this. Localizing programming such as that, is that something that's led by the ERGs? And in that, can you just tell us a little bit about what your employee resource groups have to offer?
Sure. I think we were a little ahead of our time. Our first ERG was founded 10 years ago. We're actually celebrating it this month. It's called the Aspire Group. It's our women's group. But we actually have 11 ERGs now. And we really believe that our approach to ERGs really reflect our commitment to workplace inclusion, and belonging. Participation is voluntary. All of our ERGs have executive sponsors. So, for instance, I'm the executive sponsor of the Aspire Group. They're all provided with budgets for events. If they want to have guest speakers or do any kind of training. And at the end of the day, we allow the folks that participate in our ERGs ample time during the workday to get involved and to participate. So they've been very, very successful over the years.
Oh, absolutely. And are they helping plan a lot of these events as well?
They do.
Okay.
They're very active in planning. For instance, the Aspire Group they have 4 different committees, and they do pretty much monthly events throughout the organization. So very active.
Awesome. Well, we have a couple of audience questions that I'd like to get to before we get to a poll question that I have for everybody. Chris asked, Have segments of Huber been impacted by recent natural disasters, Helene and wildfires? And how has the company responded? It sounds like you have a great culture of care and support.
We have been, for instance, recently the Asheville, North Carolina area was impacted by a disaster, unfortunately. So we do everything from people go out there and volunteer, we send food, we send money through different organizations, but we do that throughout the country. We support, especially in the communities with which we work. Asheville, North Carolina is only an hour and a half from us, 2 hours. And so it has impacted even, employees who have family members there. So.
And someone else asked, this is kind of almost a nice follow-up question to that. How do you plan for crises before they happen and ensure that DE&I policies and practices continue or kind of buttress what is going on right now?
I could jump in. So that's an interesting way to kind of weave together those two topics. A couple things come to mind. One is that we have a team that's part of what we call Huber Helps, and so they have a budget that they run every year, and so we have certain partners that we support every single year. So one example is Habitat for Humanity, but then in addition to that, there are opportunities for each site to identify organizations that have certain needs that align with some key areas that we focus on. So housing is a key area. Supporting people in times where they're affected by natural disasters is another. So in the case of Helene, most of that budgeting was supported through that budget. But then also locally, where we identified some new organizations to support. I think from the DEI perspective, I mentioned that one of the pillars of our strategy is community, and we kind of think about that in the immediate term as well as long term. So an example would be Project Rubicon is an organization that we've gotten involved with, and so they were responsive both to the wildfires in California and then also some severe storm damage this year. So we have partnerships in place. But then in addition to that, we're thinking forward and saying, what are the partnerships that we need to start working on today where the impact may be 5-10 years down the road. So we try to look at it from both angles.
That makes a lot of sense. And I am going to ask you one more ERG question. I think there are a lot of questions about that, a lot of buzz about that in the chat right now. And then we'll move forward and return to some more questions a little bit further down the line. But Jonathan Pock asks, have any of your ERGs experienced any dips in engagement? If so, how have you navigated low ERG engagement at this time? He shared a little bit that their company has experienced some lower engagement across the board.
I think the engagement has been consistent. I think that the challenge for us, we've I would say two areas of challenge. One is I mentioned that most of our workforce is hourly employees. So figuring out how do we apply that model to an hourly workforce. The second challenge has been around leadership of the ERGs. So typical tenure of a leadership group in an ERG is 2 to 3 years for us. And so, these are voluntary roles. They're not compensated. And so things can happen in the business where all of a sudden somebody's saying, I don't know if I have the bandwidth to keep driving the ERGs. So I think with that, the way that we've addressed it is basically we have what we call pillar leads. So the leadership structure is you have 2 to 3 people leading the ERG, and then 2 to 3 people who are just passionate about the topic, and they might plan 1 or 2 programs a year for the ERG. So that's proven to be sustainable for us. The first area I would say is that with the hourly workforce, I don't know that we have that fully figured out at the moment. But in the meantime, what we've done is going back to that localized approach. So for instance, if we have a program that works well for salaried employees at our headquarters, we work with local HR, local plant manager to figure out, what does this look like for your hourly workforce. So for instance, for Hispanic Heritage Month, we had a number of local food trucks that we participated with that were Hispanic owned, and then the nature of the food fit the theme of the month. But then we also introduced some educational content so that while people were eating, they were also having conversations with each other and learning about the history and significance of the month.
Oh, that is a great way, just a great example to share with everyone. We are going to
Food
put up
brings everyone together. That's
always. We are going to put up a poll question. You all can see on your screen. We want to know, we're curious, on whole, how does your workforce's perception of DE&I in general differ from their perception of your organization's actual DE&I programming, sort of like how we're talking right now? Go ahead and answer for us. We have the responses. It could either be our actual program has a more positive response, or about the same overall positive, or on the other side of that, about the same overall negative. Tell us what you think. It's looking like we have a bit of a horse race here. Any predictions for where this will land?
I think we have a pretty clear leader too.
Yeah, I think so.
No, and by the way, I love that localized approach that you're talking about, that it just resonates so well with what we see in our research, where, if you make it sticky for the organization, for the group of employees that you're talking to, and really make it relate to them, it takes a lot of because there's so much out there in the environment right now that really doesn't represent the work that goes on in a lot of organizations. And when you bring it down to that local level and bring that, really think about how you're defining your DE&I initiatives for your organization through those local efforts, I think that makes a huge difference. And it looks like from the research we're seeing here, or from the poll results we're seeing here, that that's pretty agreed upon.
Oh, yeah. I think we have our response here. Most people are saying it stayed about the same. Overall positive. Does that surprise anyone here? Matt, Elise?
I
Not
think it's
surprising.
it gets back to that gap that we talked about between kind of the perception at the macro level versus the specific reaction to people's experience.
Mm-hmm. That's good to see.
Well, we will move on to our next question. Just talking about managing the shifts in the environment, because I think that's kind of the prompting of this question in general, of the poll that we did, is the environment. We can't get around the fact that it has shifted. So how have you all addressed the shifting landscape around your employee programs? Matt?
Yeah, thanks. I'll kind of come at this from two angles. One is, it seems that even before the shift in the current landscape, a table stake requirement is to understand the legal risk, the legal matters of this type of work. And so in that sense, I would say things haven't changed. That's something we always have to be knowledgeable about. However, that landscape is moving faster now. And so, of course, that's something we need to stay knowledgeable of. And I'd recommend, just as a matter of good practice, that anybody in this work should do the same. Now, I would say, though, too, like in a nutshell, it's had no impact to the actual work that we're doing. So the work, the efforts that we've had have been very, very well received by our employees, and they're rooted, as Elise mentioned, in a long, long history at this company of the values that we have, and what our sense of, what is the right way to treat each other as employees, and also what's the right role for us to have in the community that we're part of. That goes back almost 150 years for us, and so that hasn't changed, even though the kind of the environment around us has certainly changed over the course of 150 years. The values are the same.
How have you all communicated that? Did you all send out a formal communications? I think there's been a lot of debate and questions even among our own members of, do we say something if we're keeping things the same? Do we kind of stay quiet? What How have y'all gone about that?
Both. So there's been communication at the organizational level. Again, I think the thought process for us has been there's an elephant in the room, and so address it head on. But then again, at the localized level. So when we're face to face with our employees, we'll say, kind of at an open-ended level, what are you all thinking? What's on your mind? And if it's crickets in response, then we'll address it head on and say, look, well, here's some things you might have heard. You might have heard that there's a lot of noise around this topic right now. But our commitment is resolute because number one, it's consistent with our values, and number two, the feedback that we get from you on this programming is great. Now, I would say even this week, I was at our plant in Easton, Maine, and some anonymous feedback that I got from our employees was, "I'm glad to see we're continuing to do this work." And this is coming from a manufacturing site in a very rural area part of the state, but their experience has been positive.
That's awesome to hear. And I'm curious, for your anonymous feedback that you're, enabling employees to kind of give their reaction to things live, and obviously you're listening. What's been your method for collecting that feedback? I think a lot of people are always interested in knowing how you go about your listening.
So I'll say the approach we've taken may not be feasible for everybody, but we've seen also when we do employee engagement surveys that there's always some amount of skepticism in terms of, is this really anonymous?
Mm-hmm.
And so we really value the feedback, and in particular at our plants, what's proven to be most effective is an old school paper survey. Now the challenge is that means it all has to be tabulated manually. But for us, we think the reward is worth the effort, and so that's how we continue to do it.
Absolutely. I'm sure there are a lot of people here who are silently cheering because those methods still work and they're still important, especially when you have employees physically coming in to a plant every day. Absolutely. Well, we can't have this conversation, of course, without talking about business outcomes. So, Elise, I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to, what you've seen in terms of business outcomes of Huber's approach to inclusion and belonging.
Sure. So there's several business outcomes. I'd say one is employee retention and engagement. So as Matt mentioned, our turnover rate is around 5%, which is really, really low for a manufacturing company. But we truly believe that our employees are likely to stay when they feel that they're included and they have this, true sense of belonging. I think another one is, high productivity and performance. So, employees belonging really increases psychological safety, leading to more collaboration, leading to more risk taking, and definitely innovation. I'd say another one is probably the attraction of top talent. So, we do know that companies with strong inclusion practices stand out to job seekers. That's who people want to go work for. A culture of belonging is definitely a significant factor for attracting top talent, particularly for Gen Z and millennials. At least that's been our experience, And then lastly, I would say probably better decision making and innovation. So we also know, and research shows, that inclusive teams bring more perspectives, leading to more creative problem solving and better, decision making at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I do want to make sure that we leave time for a few more audience questions. I am going to pivot back to the surveys because there is actually a lot of excitement around that. I'm going to combine a couple questions. There's curiosity around what's the response rate with the paper surveys, if you know, and then also, have you tried text message surveys? Just give us a little bit more detail on that.
So the second part, that we've not tried the text messaging. We're aware of it. The challenge gets back to this skepticism around if you're sending it to my cell phone, do I really trust that it's anonymous? So I would love to do that. But like I said, at the moment, what we value most is that people trust the method. So we've stayed paper. The response rate is consistently over 90%.
Wow.
So
That's really good.
So this really makes us feel like we're getting a very good finger on the pulse of our team.
I'd say so. I would say so. And When you send out engagement surveys, I know I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here, but what's the response rate to your engagement surveys, the ones that are, done online where people might be a little bit more worried?
At least you might help me out with that. I think the last one we did was, it's also very high relative to peer sets. I think
Good.
it's in the 80s.
In the 80s, low 80s. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's successful then for sure. Another question that came up in the chat that I did want to make sure that we got to, Tanya asked, is neurodiversity included in the DE&I efforts? And if so, what does that look like?
So at the moment, no. Now the topic has come up in various training that we've offered to provide some education on what neurodiversity is. But in terms of having a dedicated ERG, currently we do not. But it's something that is definitely on the radar.
Absolutely. And then one last audience question before we move on. There was just questions about, for the people who work in plants, manufacturing, making sure that they have the time to engage in these programming. And you've hit on this a little bit, but it does take time out the day to go sit and maybe eat lunch and learn from your peers. It's takes a little bit more intention than usual. How are you making sure that the culture supports that they feel like they can take that extra beat and some extra time to learn?
That's a great question. A couple things come to mind. One is realizing that our content is just a piece of the puzzle of all the different training and obligations that our employees have, and so very close relationship with the plant manager, with the HR manager at the plant to make sure that what we're doing is cohesive to the entirety of everything they're trying to do. From a timing standpoint, we operate 24/7 on our plants, and so if we ask an hourly employee to come in for an hour-long training, that means it's a 13-hour day. And so I think there's a certain amount of humility that we need to have in terms of when we're asking for that time. So typically it's once a year for this content that we're doing an in-person training. But then some of the other things, like if we're bringing in lunch, we're making sure to coordinate that so it's either done during a break or maybe there's a plant outage where they're doing maintenance. So I guess in a nutshell, what I would say is that it's really important that the left hand knows what the right is doing, and we're coordinating all that through the site.
Absolutely. I like the word humility that you used. Humility, empathy, understanding in terms of figuring out where to place these programs, when to do it, and understanding people's time. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of us I think we're all kind of left with this question, especially right now in today's environment. What's next? What's coming next for your respective teams at Huber? What do you kind of have your eyes set on? Alyssa, I'll let you start with that one.
Yeah, sure. I think overall, we can probably say we're going to stay the course with our existing workforce. Nothing crazy on the horizon. But as I mentioned previously, we are building this new plant in Mississippi. And so Matt and I are developing a plan on, how are we going to onboard 150 new employees into the organization to really ensure that they feel welcomed at Huber, and that they're, assimilating into our culture from day one when they start employment with us. So that's going to be a big project for us.
And Matt?
From my side, what I'll add is that, with respect to the overall environment, the shifting landscape, I remind myself that nobody said the work was going to be easy. And so, I've been very encouraged by just seeing that by connecting with our employees at all levels of the organization, people do feel energized and positive about the experiences that they have. And so that what I would say for anybody doing this kind of work is let's stay grounded in the purpose and why we're doing this work, and let's stay very very close and connected to our employees so that we understand what's working for them and what gives them energy as well.
Yeah, I've been asking chief diversity officers for the past few years. I mean, my background's in journalism before I moved into research, and I can remember even asking chief diversity officers in 2020, in 2022, what is keeping you optimistic? And I think that you kind of hit on it there, Matt. It's the energy that you're still receiving from your employees. Is that accurate?
That's it. That's right.
Absolutely. Well, a question that I have, because a lot of people here have a true interest in doing the work. And so, what advice do you give it professionals who still want to do this, who still want to work in the realm of DE&I, but might feel discouraged by the current politicized environment? Elise, I'd love to go to you first for that one.
Actually, I'm going to let Matt take that because he does the work. And
So
he's really good at it.
I should caveat this by saying I'm more of an optimist in my nature, and so I'm confident some people would have differing opinions on this. But what I would say to somebody who's interested in getting in this work but feeling some stress about doing it at this moment is get out into the real world and talk with employees. And talk up. So, for instance, this message I'm driving around, staying in contact with our employees. We're an industrial manufacturer. We operate in rural areas, and so when we launched this programming, people weren't necessarily jumping off the sidelines and saying, "Yes, I can't wait to do this." They had a lot of questions, but once we started to deliver actual experiences, the response has been so positive. So what I would say is, to the degree you can, detach yourself from the noise on the news and social media and so forth, and go talk with your actual employees and share with them your ideas and what you want to do and why. And you might be surprised by what that's met with. And then the second piece of advice I would give is really look inward and think about what's the driving purpose for why you want to do this. And if you feel conviction in that, then when you face these kind of external storms or even internal barriers inside the business, that'll give you the energy you need to keep going down the path.
That's great advice. And one of my final questions before I get to a couple final audience questions, is what do you look for in professionals to join your team? Are there any just interesting new talent pools that you're seeing right now? Because it takes a lot of unique skills to do this work.
It does. I would say, we look for core competencies, such as technical skills, problem solving, communication skills. Adaptability is a huge one for us, particularly being in a manufacturing setting. But most importantly, when we interview, I would say 80% of our interview is around culture fit and alignment with our values and principles. Because you can teach people how to do jobs, but it's tough if you find somebody who doesn't fit within the culture and the organization. And, we also look for diversity of thought. That's most important to us. When you talk about new pools, I would say, workers with vocational training, certifications, or, hands-on experience, particularly in areas like cybersecurity, robotics, advanced manufacturing. We've also been rethinking, traditional degree requirements. We used to always require that everybody had a degree, and we're a lot more lenient on that now. We used to do a lot of military hiring prior to COVID. We stopped for a while, but we're revisiting that. So looking for, military veterans who have strong leadership, discipline, problem-solving skills, especially in operations. And then, we're also entertaining formerly incarcerated talent, people who are looking for a second chance, and that are often, upskilled through workforce development programs throughout the country.
I love Ben in the chat said, hire for attitude, train for skills. I think
That's
that
right.
really speaks to it. And you're getting a lot of love right now for these responses. So that's great to see. We do have some final audience questions. hitting on the ERGs because there's a lot of questions around that, because I think that's an area where companies still feel very safe to operate. These are groups that all employees are allowed to join no matter what the ERG. And so someone wanted to know, again, what was the answer to the ERG engagement question? Do you know about what percentage of your employee base is involved or engaged in your ERGs?
So the membership, we've got a mechanism where people basically sign up to be active members of the ERGs. Most of our employees who are an active member of more than one. So that's been interesting to see. So among our salaried employees, I don't have the number offhand, but I want to say it's like 50 to 60% of our salaried employees are in at least one ERG. Now, also, as I mentioned, it's about 75% of our workforce is in hourly positions, and so that we don't track in the same way. But they are participants. So if we have an event at a local site, typically it's almost all the employees that are participating in that event. So I think it depends on how we keep score on that question. But in essence, our employees have stayed active in the program.
It sounds like it. Yeah. Martha had a great question for you, Matt. Martha asked, in our conversations with employees about our DE&I efforts, what questions should we be asking, since the questions really make a difference in the response that you get? So I'm guessing that Martha means in terms of when you're surveying or, just asking for feedback. What kind of questions are you asking?
So we keep it. So it's I think 6 questions that we're asking every time. So realistically, we've got an employee who needs to get back to the shop floor, so time is precious. So we're limited in the number, but every time we're asking questions around the quality of the session, we ask if they found it to be interactive and engaging. And then probably the 2 most important things we ask are, one, in essence, will they opt in to future sessions like this? And then 2 is basically a net promoter. So we're asking them, in essence, would you recommend this to your peers? Now one insight I would say that's just been very interesting. It'd be interesting to see if others find the same. Is the instance of people saying they would recommend it to their peers is always higher than the ones who would opt in for themselves. So it's in essence, it's, for my friend, oh yeah, he should do this, but I'm not so sure about myself next time. As I've dug into this, for us, what's going on is we have some number of employees who are just saying, look, I want to come to work, do an honest day's work, and then go home. I'm not looking for like additional experiences, additional time. And then the second is mostly like a general attitude towards training, where it's like, look, I don't see how this directly impacts the job I have to do tomorrow, so I'd rather opt out of this type of training. Now, what I would say though is around 70% of our employees are saying they'll opt in, and it's about 90% are saying they would recommend it to their peers. So overall, we feel very positive about those results.
Yeah, very, very high, very positive. And then one more question. I mean, keep them coming, people. I love these. Jim Anderson did ask, do you have a prototype for balancing delivering content where people feel like something is being fed to them, almost like a training, and then just providing a forum for people to simply converse with one another? Because we found that having those conversations sometimes go further than anything. How do you balance those two?
I would totally agree with that. I mean, it's in practice for most of our workforce, the classic kind of educational training, it's once a year. Now for people leaders, it's more like twice a year. But the programs that are more just people interacting with each other, they're learning a little bit, they're engaging with each other, far more of those. So it's probably like, let's say they're doing 3 or 4 programs like that a year on average, and one kind of formalized education training.
Absolutely. And our last question before Eric closes today, Jonathan asked a great question. Curious to hear, have you been able to compare your survey results with other competitors within your industry?
No, we've not been able to benchmark to competitors, unfortunately.
Well, it sounds like you all are doing well, and it's pretty clear that you all are doing well through those awesome results, the engagement that you receive. Thank you so much for being, both of you, for being just so generous with your answers. And I think right now, we all just want to hear how others are doing it, how others are navigating. And so your unique experience has brought so much insight for us all. So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Elise.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much, and love the questions from the group. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Eric, back to you.
Okay. Well, so thank you all for your attention. Thank you, Alyssa and Matt and Amber, for the great discussion. And for those who are fulfilling their HRCI and SHRM recertification credit hours, those ID numbers are available on screen here. Boom, get that. And are on screen here and in chat. Just write down the relevant program ID or activity ID to get credit for this call. And thank you again for attending. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.